And we continue Gemara Nedarim Daf Yod Aleph. This is the Daf for Shabbos, and we pick it up from Yod Amud Beis on the bottom. And the Mishnah now is going to begin and discuss a concept that we touched upon in the Mishnah on Daf Beis. And this is called a hatfasa. This is to be matfis a neder. And what this means is, if I have two items in front of me, I have my cup of water over here, and I have a carbon over here, or I have something hektish over here, and I want to say that this should be like this. Does that work? Will that have a status of a neder if I go and I say that item A should be like item B? And with that we begin the Mishnah that says the Mishnah. Ha'omer, if someone says, and 1 second, let's get that highlighting up and running. There we go. Ha'omer, if someone says, no, there we don't go. One more time. There you go. 3 times the chime. Ha'omer tahar v'tamei noiser upegol aser. These are all statements that someone says. If someone says, and I knew something was wrong, we skipped a line. One more time. Ha'omer lachulin she'oicha lecha. There we go. That's a little bit better. If someone says lachulin, now the word lachulin, as the Ran and others explain over here, that the Lamed is coming along to teach us loy chulin. La chulin is tantamount to saying loy chulin. This entity is not chulin. What is it? As the Ran speaks out, ela karban loy kosher. This entity is not kosher. Ela aser loy dachi. This entity is not pure. Ela aser. These are all different words that someone says. So number of time, ha'omer lachulin sha'ich lecha. So it's lachulin. It's not chulin sha'ich lecha. That which I eat of yours. Loi kosher, or he says not kosher. Loi dachi, it's not pure, it's not clean. Now tahar. Over here he doesn't say the word loi. We're going to have to see what that means. Vitame, or he says that which I eat of yours should be tame. Noiser, he says it's noiser, leftover carbon, pigol, a carbon with the inappropriate machshava, thoughts. Aser, the loch, in all these cases, the other person's food is forbidden. As similar to the not similar, the status of an eder. If I say your food to me is loy chulin, it's not chulin. What does that mean? That means your food is a carbon. La chulin she'ich loy kosher, etc. Continues the Mishnah with another set of items one could say. Ke'imra. If someone says this should be like an imra, like a lamb, like a carbon. Ke'dirim, it should be like a dirim. Ke'etzim, dirim is an enclosure, as we'll see in the Gemara. Ke'etzim, it should be like wood. Ke'ishim, it should be like fire. Ke'mizbeach, it should be like mizbeach. Ke'echol, like the echol. Yerushalayim, like Yerushalayim. Nodar, in all of these cases, nodar be'echad, mikom mishamshim mizbeach, or he makes a neder from any of the items that are used on the mizbeach. Afal pi, shloi hizkir carbon. Even though he did not mention explicitly this should be a carbon, harei zen neder b'carbon. This has the status of a neder with a carbon, and on this final dinner of Yudayim Yerushalayim, lo yamar klum. You just said, now, just to point out, the Mishnah said ki Yerushalayim, and a review that says Yerushalayim, the Gemara will discuss, lo yamar klum. So that's the Mishnah teaching us, someone says someone else's food should be la chulin, not chulin, but obviously what does that mean? But rather a carbon will have the power of a neder. And with that we move over to Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, in which we begin the Gemara. And the Gemara begins by teaching us Savrua. They thought to say, my la chulin. What did he mean when he says la chulin? Loi lechulin lahave. It means this should not be chulin. Rather, what should it be? It should be a carbon, ella, carbon. So from the Mishnah, the Gemara explains why when someone says your food is la chulin, am I then not allowed to eat it? Because what I'm saying is loy chulin, ella, carbon. It's not chulin, but rather it is a carbon. And that is where the Mishnah says it works. Of course, everyone's already conjuring up in their minds that this is a neder, this is saying something's a carbon by not explicitly, by not positively saying it's a carbon, but rather by implicitly, by inferring that it should be such, and the Mishnah is ruling that has the status of a neder. And on that comments the Gemara, Mani Mas Nisan, who is the din, who is the Tana of our Mishnah? Rabbi Meir. If you're going to say the Tana of Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, lastly, Rabbi Meir does not hold of Michlalav Atashmein. What does that mean? That means that from the positive, you can infer, from the negative, you can infer the positive. Our Mishnah seemingly held from the negative, you can infer the positive. For the fact that I said, La chulin, your food is not chulin. What did we infer? That it's not chulin. But what is it? A carbon. So the Mishnah seemingly did infer from his statement, whereas Rameir says not. So Rameir cannot be our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, the Tanan, what's the Rayo? That's Rameir. Rameir Oimer, says Rameir, call Tanai she'enu kitanai b'nei God u'b'nei Ruven. Famously, Rameir says, what is the source? What is the Mekar? Gemara in Kedushin, that all Tanayim, all stipulations have to be not an inference, but an explicit statement. It's from the Tanai b'nei God b'nei Ruven. They did not want to go. They wanted to receive the land on the other side, outside of Eretz Yisrael. And from the parsha over there, the way that Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to the children of God and Ruven, we learn that all hilchos of Tanayim. Tanayim meaning stipulations. That any Tanai that does not conform to the original Tanai, any Tanai which is not identical to the Tanai of Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain, does not have the din of a Tanai. That is the opinion of Rameir, and therefore asks the Gemara that Rameir cannot be our Mishnah. Because one of the conditions of the Tanai Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain was what? That you have to say explicitly the Tanai, explicitly that what you want to do, and not that you can infer it from the negative. And in our Mishnah, what are we doing? He's saying, La chulin. Your food is la chulin. Your food is not chulin. And from there, we're inferring that it's what? It's not chulin, but it's a carbon. That's called mechlala, from the negative, the la chulin, the not chulin, we atashemeya, the hein, that it's yes, a carbon. And Rameir holds we don't do that. And the Mishnah says we do. So ask the Gemara that the Mishnah cannot be Rameir. Ela Rav Yehudi. So says the Gemara, okay, if it's not Rameir, then who must it be? It must be Rav Yehuda. But he must say, for the end of the Mishnah, says Rav Yehuda, Amar Shalayim Loimer Klum. The end of the Mishnah, Rav Yehuda talks. If he talks at the end of the Mishnah, he's clearly not the beginning of the Mishnah. Midaseva Rav Yehuda, Reish Alav Rav Yehudi. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. If the end of the Mishnah is Rav Yehuda, clearly the beginning of the Mishnah is not Rav Yehuda. So the Mishnah can't be Rameir, seemingly cannot be Rav Yehuda. What are we going to do? Who is the Tan of our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Kula Rav Yehuda hi v'achi katani. Really, it's all Rav Yehuda. And how do we amend the Mishnah to say that it's all Rav Yehuda? Change that last line. Not Rav Yehuda Oimer that he's saying a new statement. She Rav Yehuda Oimer. That Rav Yehuda says, Oim Yerushalayim lo yamar klum. Rav Yehuda was talking. He's the Tana of the Reisha, and then he adds on that if you said Yerushalayim, it's no good. So the Mishnah and the Reisha says, din number 1, La Chulin, that's Rav Yehuda. Din number 2, Ki Yerushalayim, this item's like Yerushalayim, it's a good neder, that's Rav Yehuda. And din number 3, but if you said Yerushalayim, then it's no good. Asks the Gemara, 1 second. V'chiyamar Ki Yerushalayim, the Rav Yehuda mi misar. Is what you're saying accurate? That according to Rav Yehuda, if you said it's like Yerushalayim, it has the din of a neder. V'atani, we learned in a rise of Yehuda, ki Yerushalayim, lo yamar klum. But Rav Yehuda holds that if someone says that something should be like Yerushalayim, it does not have a din of a neder. So how could you tell me that it's Rav Yehuda? So the Mishnah can't be Rameir, it can't be Rav Yehuda. We're at a problem. The only way it works, something that's actually karov, something that's actually sacrificed on Yerushalayim. So who is the Tan of our Mishnah? Seemingly it's neither Rameir, because the Mishnah says that from the lav, we yes our shemeya ve'hein for the negative of lachulin. We infer the positive that's a carbon, nor can it be Rav Yehuda, as Rav Yehuda talks at the end of the Mishnah. And furthermore, the beginning of the Mishnah doesn't fit with Rav Yehuda. So says the Gemara, the classical Teretz, Kula Rav Yehudi, Trei Tanaya, leave it to Rav Yehuda. Explains the Gemara that really it's all Rav Yehuda. If it's all Rav Yehuda, we know that Rav Yehuda says Ki Yerushalayim does not go, does not work. Explains the Gemara, there are two different Tanoim, two Talmidim that learn what is the din according to Rav Yehuda. And now we flip over to Yud Aleph Amud Beis, and we continue part B of today's shir. So part A was dealing with who is the Tana, and we explained it's not Rav Meir, but it could be Rav Yehuda, because there are two different Tanoim, two different Talmidim that learn what is the din of Rav Yehuda. Continues the Gemara, Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, Chulin achulin kechulin. If someone says any of these three statements, this should be chulin or the chulin or like chulin. And then whether he adds on, bein sha'oich bein sha'loich whether he adds on chulin that I will eat, chulin that I won't eat, ha chulin I will eat, ha chulin I won't eat, kechulin I will eat, kechulin I won't eat it. In any of those 6 scenarios, mutter, the halacha is you're allowed to eat that food. But if he said la chulin sha'oich lecha, but if he said part number 2, if he says la chulin, it's not chulin that which I'll eat of yours, meaning your food is not chulin, but rather what is it? It's carbon, like our Mishnah. Aser. Finally, part 3 of the Brisa, la chulin lo yoichel lecha, then it is mutter. So we have a Brisa, 3 parts of the Brisa. Part A of the Brisa, if he says chulin that I will not eat of yours, that I will eat of yours, ha chulin, ki chulin, it's allowed to be in. If he says la chulin, then he's not allowed to be in. If he says la chulin lo yoichel, then it's yes allowed to be in. So says the Gemara, Reisha Mani, who is the din of the Reisha? Rav Meiri, to last leim b'chalav, ata shemei hein. Beautiful. Who is the first opinion of this Brisa? It's simply Rav Meir, that from the negative we do not infer the positive. And that is the reason why when he says, la chulin she'oicha lecha, it's aser. Why is it? That is the reason why. One more time. Rav Misha Reisha Mani, Rav Meiri, the last name of Chalav Tashmei Ahin. Good. Ema Seifa, but then we continue reading the Brisa. The Seifa says, La chulin lo eichel lecha, the case I just spoke out, it is mutter. The last case, it says it's mutter, which sounds like that doesn't fit with Rav Meir. It seems a bit of a contradiction. Are we saying that from the negative we infer the positive or not? Rav Meir says we do not infer the positive from the negative. And therefore, in the first case of the Mishnah, it's going to be mutter. In the Brisa, Problem is, what do we do at the end of the Brisa? V'hotinan. However, we explained la karba loy oichel lecha, a statement almost identical to the end of the Brisa. If someone says la karban, which means it's not a karban, that which I will not eat of yours, what is the halacha? Rav Meir oiser. Rav Meir says the halacha is it is forbidden. Now, why would Rav Meir say it is forbidden? Vakashalan. And we asked, so what is the reason? According to Rav Meir, it is a good neder. When you say la karban lo that it's a good neder and it's forbidden, we know Rav Meir holds that we do not infer the positive from the negative. So how do we explain this part of the Brisa? You know how we explain it? That when someone says loy karban loy oichalecha, we make it as if he said la karban yeh. It's as if he said that your food should be like a karban. Lefikach loy oichalecha. So when someone says la karban loy oichalecha, what's he really saying? Le karban yeh kama. Therefore, I'm not going to eat it. So says the Gemara, and if that's the way you're going to explain the statement of La karban loy oichel lecha hachanami in our brisa chikamar, it should mean the same thing. Loy chulin lahave. It's not chulin. Levikach loy oichel lecha, and therefore I'm not going to be able to eat it. So the question is, so why does the brisa say 3 lines into this amud? Everyone kalach lachal chaz mutter. Why? It should be just like saying la karban lo eichelecha. And just like when someone says la karban lo eichelecha, it is forbidden. So too when someone says la chulin lo eichelecha, it should also be forbidden. So says the Gemara, I don't understand this brisa. Seemingly it's Rav Meir. We can reconcile this seifa with Rav Meir by saying that what did he mean? La karban yehei, la chulin yehei, and therefore lefikach lo eichelecha. But then it should work, and it should be a good neder. Why did the Brisa say it is mutter? Answers the Gemara about 13 lines down. The first word line is ha'oichalacha, hai tana savala k'rameir bechada, upalig alei bechada. This Tana holds like Rameir with regard to, the Gemara now explains, savala kavasei bechada, the last name bechalavat shemei hate. He holds like Rav Meir that we do not infer the positive from the negative. But he argues with Rav Meir on one did a bit carbon. He argues with this end of the Mishnah, the end of the Brisa, that said when someone says la carbon, that what does it mean? Le carbon yehei v'loy eichelecha, that the Tana argues on. So he agrees with Rav Meir in part and he argues in part. Teretz number 1. Teretz number 2, Rav Ashi Amar. Says Rav Ashi, ha da'amar, that which it says, lachulin. Ha da'amar, the brisa is not lachulin, but lechulin. Va da'amar, loy lechulin, which is lachulin. Demashma loy lahave chulin ela kekarbon. So answers the Gemara, it's the same word, lachulin, lakarbon, lechulin, lekarbon. It's all the same word. The question is, does that lamed get translated as loy? Like we started off in the beginning when we read the Mishnah, and we said that la chulin, whenever you have that means loy. So says the Gemara, that is the point that's changing between the Mishnah and the Brisa. If it's le chulin, le carbon, then we can translate that it should yes be chulin, yes be carbon, and therefore I won't eat it. And therefore the neder is going to work. But if it's la chulin, then the neder will not work. And now we finish off today's shir by beginning the next sugya in which the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, 10 lines to the bottom of your album base. Tar vetame noiser upegol aser. Asks the Gemara. Ba'i Rami Bar Chama, inquires Rami Bar Chama. Harei alai kebasar zivchei shlamim la'achar zrikas dami mahu. What is the status? So someone says, this item should be like the carbon shlamim after you're zayrik the dam. Now what's this detail of la'achar zrikas damim? What this means is la'achar zrikas damim is when you are allowed to eat the carbon. So I ask the Gemara, if someone says la carbon, someone says that this item should be like the basar of the carbon, only after the zivchei, after the zrika, do we say that it is allowed, just like right now after the zrika you're allowed to eat from the carbon? Or no, it's essentially like the carbon and therefore you're not allowed to eat it. Now this question is going to take us all the way into tomorrow's daf, but let's just begin it for a moment. Says the Gemara, if he said it like you just said, then it's clear what he's saying. He's saying clearly it should be like the carbon after the zrika, that's behatira. He's grabbing hold of an entity that you're allowed to eat. So therefore, what's the question? Of course it's not a neder. You know what the case is? That lying in front of him is some meat of a carbon. And as well, lying in front of him is a piece of food. And he says, that's the shayla. I have a piece of carbon shlamim. I have a piece of bread. And I say the bread is like the shlamim. What is the halacha? And with that we conclude. And we conclude with the shayla that says the Gemara, is it behetira kamatfis, that he's having in mind the carbon now, even though carbonis you can't eat, but right, meaning a carbon is an entity that you can't eat, but right now, lachar zrika, you can yes eat it, or be'isura kamatfis, that essentially it's a carbon that you cannot eat it. We'll pick it up from Rava, who's going to come to answer the shayla in the next year. B'siyata dishmaya.